And Jesus commends this church for doing all the right things. But in verse 4, he has one monumental and stinging criticism of them. Verse 4, he says this, "Yet this I hold against you. You have forsaken the love you had at first." You see, he wasn't criticizing this church because they weren't generous givers, or because they weren't faithful servants, or because they weren't patient endurers. They hadn't been led astray by bad theology and by bad doctrine. They didn't have the wrong books on the shelf. They didn't have the wrong pastors in the pulpit. They hadn't given up. They hadn't stopped trying. It was hard, but they did it. They had persevered. This was a church that you or I would walk into, and on the surface it would seem like it might check all of the boxes. You see, but Jesus sees what's happening internally, not just externally, and he says to them, "You are absolutely dutiful and faithful." He says, "But I can see your heart and I can see your motivations, and what I can see is that you forgot why you were doing any of the things you were doing in the first place." You see, somewhere along the lines in the 40 years since Paul had visited planted this church, somewhere in the midst of all the spiritual battles and the church planting and the disciple making and all of the work of ministry, little by little, over time, they had forgotten why they were doing the things that they were doing. They had started to take the gospel for granted, and their hearts weren't anymore captivated by Jesus' glory and his goodness and his love for them. Their work they did was no longer motivated by a love for him and a joyful gratitude for all he had done, and that overflowed into other people. Instead, they were just going through the motions. They were the right motions, but they were just going through the motions. And all they had left was dead orthodoxy and heartless morality and empty religion. And Jesus' criticism of this church is sobering. You can be doing all of the right things, but without the right motivations, it is still the wrong thing. One commentator explains it this way: in her keenness for the truth, the church at Ephesus had lost her love, the one quality without which all others are worthless. 1 Corinthians 13, Paul writes, "If I speak in the tongues of men or angels but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, then I am nothing. And if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but I do not have love, then I gain nothing." You see, let me just ask you this morning, is the fire of your love and your devotion for Jesus still burning in your heart? Or has your love for him grown cold? You're not a heretic. You're not a false teacher. You've not walked away from God. You've not stopped giving or serving or reading or caring or investing in his people or his kingdom, but your love for him is cold. You see, the reality is that when it comes to our relationship with Jesus, you are never standing still. You are never standing still. You are either drawing closer to him or you are drifting away from him. And God was gracious in my own heart to convict me of that this week. You see, it's easy to get caught up in a life of doing ministry for Jesus, but miss a life of being with him in the first place. A life cultivated out of love for him. You see, the reality is what we do for the Lord is absolutely important, but what matters far more is why we do it. You see, our love for him matters.